Hey girls. I'm so excited to go live. I know you guys missed me last week. Well, I don't mean like you missed me, but I know you guys missed the live last week. And so I'm hoping that a few of you show up tonight. I'll just give you guys a few minutes to just join. And I hope you guys are doing really, really well. It's really interesting because like it's coming up at the end of the year, and it's super crazy to think that when I started this year, I think I had like 1,500 followers or around like 2,000 followers. So it's so crazy to see you guys moved all the way up to like 15,000 of you are following me. This is all of the stories and lives I've done this whole year. So I just finished this notebook up, and this is all full of my notes for just lives and stories and podcasts and things like that. So it's been a really good year. Sometimes I'm really hard on myself, and I think like, gosh, I could have done better, but you know, it's been a really good year, and I have you guys to thank for that. And I'm hoping that we can continue to spread truth together. We know that there are a lot of women out there that need this information. They're struggling, they're suffering, and they think it's normal, they think it's common, and it's definitely not normal. It might be common, but not normal. And, it's important for women to be empowered by their bodies. So you guys can ask questions at whenever you want. Trying to think of questions that have been coming in. I feel like I've gotten so many questions lately in the DMs, mostly about the HTMA that I did on Monday. So I kind of went over the HTMA, and that is, a lot of you guys were asking like, how do I get an HTMA done? And usually you have to work with a practitioner that will run them, that has an account with the lab. I do run them. I'm just not taking one-on-one clients until the new year. It's just kind of been, I really want to be able to offer more to my one-on-one clients, so I am redoing kind of like my client experience. So waiting it out is going to pay off for my new clients at the beginning of the year. But yeah, I run HTMAs. They're under $100. They're a pretty inexpensive test, and they tell you a lot of information. You do have to retest about every 3 to 4 months, but because it's such an inexpensive test, it's easy to do so. All right, so thoughts on hysterectomy, but keep ovaries, hormonal consequences. There's always hormonal consequences to removing an organ, specifically one so important as the uterus and the ovaries. There is emerging research coming out, which I could have guessed, right? That the uterus actually does communicate with the brain as much as the ovaries do. Now, this research is emerging, so there's no names for these hormones, but, there is a brain to uterine connection. How much that affects people's health, I'm not sure. I will tell you based on experience, and of course I'm not a doctor, but whenever I am, working with a client, I'm always making observations, and I would say, every single woman that I know with a hysterectomy has serious problems, regardless of if she has her ovaries or not. I do think like if you have to get the procedure, if it's medically necessary, it's absolutely something you should, discuss with your doctor and make the decision that's right for you. And I think leaving your ovaries is a really good kind of meet in the middle place if you truly believe that the uterus needs to be removed. But that's kind of one of those things where I would get a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh opinion. Like I would just keep going because I just would want to make sure that it absolutely needs to happen before I pulled the trigger on it. Because once it's gone, it's gone. Loved your post on potassium. Is it possible for low potassium to cause headaches and body odor when stressed? Absolutely. So body odor has to do with heavy metals, specifically iron a lot of times. The body is either mobilizing them or having a hard time mobilizing them, so like it'll pop up once in a while. I see a lot of women who have excess estrogen having body odor really bad, or when we're actually moving estrogen and moving metals and rebalancing the body odor can get really bad for a little while. And that's actually sometimes a good thing. It means you're actually getting things out. Because remember, those lymph nodes that sit right underneath those breasts, you do not want toxic metals and toxic chemicals sitting in there. And I shouldn't say toxic chemicals because everything in your body is a chemical, but pretty much toxins, environmental toxins. When it comes to headaches, potassium, absolutely, because sodium and potassium work together. They're solvent minerals to regulate blood pressure. And so a lot of times people either have excessive sodium or they're low in both potassium and sodium. And so blood pressure has a hard time stabilizing and balancing itself. And so a lot of pressure can happen in the head. Keep in mind, it's also responsible for all your nerve impulses, including, that nerve impulse all the way to the brain. Your brain's a part of the nervous system. So that is something to just keep in mind. So absolutely, it can definitely cause headaches. And I've actually seen clients get really bad headaches when they have low potassium. Can we get on a wait list? I'm not doing wait list. I'm sorry. It's one of those things where I've done a wait list before and it just doesn't end up working very well. So what I'm going to do is once I'm ready to take clients, I will let you know. And I keep in mind, like, I can see your faces. I know who's interested in working with me one-on-one. I know that you guys are like kind of chomping at the bit and waiting, and I really appreciate your patience. So I will make sure it's brought to your awareness that, my spots are opening up, and I'll make sure that you have time to jump and get on it. There's about 25 of you, so I've been kind of like making sure that everything's set up. So when I'm ready, like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna pull the trigger. Hi Jess, I've missed your lives. Oh, thank you guys. I just needed a break for a week. I'm in perimenopause and bleed every 3 weeks. This cycle I have been bleeding for 10 days, some heavy, some very light. Is this something that I just have to go through? Okay, Rain, it's one of those things where sometimes perimenopause can be rough. It's one of those things where sometimes your period becomes more frequent for a time and then it spreads out. But usually 10-day periods are pointing to either thyroid issue or excess estrogen in relationship to progesterone. Keep in mind that's very common. Women that go through menopause really stop making a lot of progesterone, and eventually when they stop their cycles altogether, they're not making progesterone, except for the progesterone that's coming from their adrenals, which is just measly amounts. And so I think it's really important, like if I go through menopause, I'm going to be supplementing with pregnenolone for sure, progesterone absolutely, and most likely DHEA depending on my needs. That would be something that during menopause I would definitely consider, and of course that's going to be quite some time away, but I'm always thinking about that because I know that once my ovaries kind of stop producing progesterone, I'm going to be without that hormone, and I never want to be without that hormone. So that's kind of something that usually when a woman's going through menopause, that's what's happening is her tissues are still making estrogen. Keep in mind all your tissues make estrogen, specifically like your fat cells and your skin and other tissues. And so you have that making estrogen, your adrenals will pump out DHEA and that's turning into estrogen. But where is the progesterone coming from? If it's not coming from your ovaries, very little amounts are maybe coming from the adrenals, but that's going to be measly. And so it's super important to make sure that progesterone is prioritized, and sometimes pregnenolone is helpful as well. And then making sure thyroid health is up to par. A lot of women that are around the perimenopause time, their metabolisms are kind of shot by that point because they've, yo-yo dieted, maybe not eaten enough for a long time, had multiple children and not really replenished themselves, have been go for like 18 years. And so they're finally their bodies are really starting to show signs of that. And so thyroid hormones, they're having a hard time getting into the cell, or the thyroid itself is struggling. So those are just things to think about when going through menopause and perimenopause. Hi Jess, thoughts on persistent shortness of breath for 2+ weeks. I feel like I constantly need to yawn to get enough oxygen. Any ideas what would be causing this? Also have SIBO and thyroid issues. I of course anything that I say would be speculation. I couldn't say for sure. That could be a lack of magnesium, lack of potassium, which is super common. Keep in mind what it takes to get oxygen into the cell. It takes minerals to do so. And also, really pay attention to your diaphragm. Is your stomach really tight or your diaphragm pretty tight? Is the pit of your stomach kind of in that stressed out fight or flight state? If that's the case, it's really important to try to take deep breaths. But if you're having a hard time even getting a full breath or feeling like you're oxygenated, there could absolutely be a mineral root cause to that. If you're already eating pretty balanced, you're eating enough carbohydrates, that's very important, especially if you have thyroid issues. it could be like a nervous system issue, like, your nervous system's having a hard time switching out of that sympathetic state. So we have our sympathetic fight or flight response and our parasympathetic rest, digest, recover response. And B vitamins are super important for that. And a lot of times when we have bacterial overgrowth, we are experiencing B vitamin deficiencies. And that can really affect the nervous system. So I know I threw a few things at you. It would be take deep breaths throughout the day. If that seems impossible, look into minerals, specifically magnesium and potassium. Sometimes just applying some magnesium oil can help and make us feel better immediately. Salt is important. Are you salting your foods well? Are you drinking salty water? And making sure that you have enough B vitamins. And those would be kind of the things I would think about. Any tips to address a really heavy flow? Doctor is telling me birth control. I talk about it a lot here, and I guess sometimes I forget to go back to the basics because I'm so I love the science behind everything, but sometimes I realize it's been a while since I talked about the basics. And keep in mind, guys, that we are supposed to have, the first half of our cycle, the whole goal of the body is to bring this egg to be presented so that the possible sperm that's there could meet the egg and a pregnancy could occur. And then the second half of the cycle, that luteal phase, the whole goal is preparing the body for implantation. You can almost think of it as like a pre-pregnancy phase. And there's a possible pregnancy about to take place at implantation, so we better prepare ourselves with progesterone and with eating enough food. That's why you're hungrier in the second half of the cycle. And then if there was no fertilization that took place, progesterone levels will plummet, and then your cycle will come on. Your flow will start and your cycle will start again. And so what's happening when we see a heavy flow is that dominant hormone that's supposed to be dominant the second half of the cycle, that progesterone, right, is not dominant. And we're seeing estrogen dominance take place the whole second half of the cycle. So the first half of the cycle, estrogen rises to bring on that drop of an egg. And then once that egg drops, that corpus luteum, the emptied egg sac, will start to make progesterone. And that will become the dominant hormone for the second half. And so when women have heavy flows, a lot of times they're just estrogen dominant. They're not making enough progesterone, whether they're under a lot of stress, they're under eating, they're eating too many phytoestrogens, lots of nuts and seeds, lots of cruciferous vegetables, lots of raw leafy greens, no, animal proteins, very little. They're eating lots of grains and beans and things. All of those plants have estrogens in them. And so when you're already struggling with detoxifying estrogen and they're eating all these estrogens, it's going to be a problem. And so it's very important to make sure you're balancing your blood sugar, you're getting your protein, carb, and fat from the right sources, you have enough magnesium, you're supporting liver detoxification so that when your liver goes to filter hormones and carry them out of the body, it can do so and do so well. We need to make sure we have B vitamins. But my biggest tips for a heavy flow is eating a raw carrot every single day. Don't miss a day. Making sure you're using like a magnesium spray, you're taking Epsom salt baths, or even maybe doing like an internal magnesium. Making sure you're balancing your blood sugar with protein, carb, and fat every 3 to 4 hours or so, and obviously making sure you're sleeping, you're not over exercising, you're not putting a lot of stress on the body, and avoiding tons of phytoestrogens. Don't do a lot of grains and beans and nuts and seeds. Get most of your food from roots and fruits for carbohydrates, ghee, grass-fed butter, coconut oil, chocolate for your fats, and animal proteins like collagen and dairy and eggs and high-quality meats and broths and things like that. And watch your body transform, because your goal is really to support detoxification and support the cells so that your body feels safe enough to reproduce. If you're ovulating or not, that's kind of the first thing you want to know. And you want to be making a lot of progesterone that second half to balance out that really harsh estrogen. But there's a lot of my story highlights go over this. So there is a story highlight called progesterone. There's another one called the menstrual cycle. They're a little old, but they're not outdated. The information there is still just as reliable as ever. So I would really check those out. Progesterone and menstrual cycle. Thoughts on taking grass-fed whey? I'm not a big fan of whey because it tends to turn into L-tryptophan, which turns into serotonin, which is super estrogenic, and we start to see the gut go wah. But some people can handle it. I prefer actually a grass-fed casein protein. Casein's super anti-cortisol, de-stressing. It absorbs really quickly. It has a very quick anti-stress response, so it's super awesome for after a workout, and it tends to be digested actually pretty well. So overall, I prefer casein or just using collagen, straight up collagen or gelatin for a protein powder. But whey is sometimes okay, but a lot of times it can cause like moodiness and gut issues and stuff like that. What do you recommend for gallstones? I remember you saying that had to do with estrogen dominance and that if they take your gallbladder, you have to supplement with something. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday, Katya. So when it comes to gallstones, of course this is not medical advice. This is just what I've seen and observations I've made. A lot of times when calcification occurs, whether that's kidney stones, gallstones, tonsil stones, we're seeing calcification. And calcification a lot of times happens from a vitamin K deficiency, because remember, calcium is a very sharp, hard mineral, and it belongs in those sharp, hard parts of your body, the bones and the teeth. But it needs vitamin K to get into the bones and the teeth. Well, vitamin K is manufactured in the gut by your gut bacteria, and a lot of people don't have really good balanced microbiomes, and so they're not making good amounts of vitamin K. And so it becomes this vicious cycle where calcium isn't getting to where it is supposed to go, and it's calcifying the soft tissues. This is what happens when we get really hardened arteries and things like that as well. So it's important to make sure we are making enough vitamin K. And the second thing is magnesium. Remember, magnesium and calcium balance each other out. Magnesium helps with the relaxation of the muscle. Calcium helps with the contraction, but they also keep each other in check. And a lot of people are magnesium deficient. So I would say most people need vitamin K, and most people would need magnesium whenever they're struggling with lots of stones. And then it's important to support the gallbladder. I really like this supplement called Bile Builder by Unikey. It has taurine in it, which is amazing for flushing fluoride out of the thyroid. It also helps with bile flow, but it also has some ox bile in it and some other bile building compounds, so it can really help get the gallbladder moving in the right direction. But gallstones are one of those things where usually they sometimes can dissolve, but sometimes they can't. It just really depends. But once we get our gallbladder out, it can be really difficult to get our hormones balanced, because the gallbladder plays a huge role. Bile plays a huge role in how we digest fats, and fats are in turn used as the building blocks of hormones. Bile is also the way that our body carries out detoxified hormones. And so a lot of times what I'm seeing is once the gallbladder is removed, it's very difficult for digestion to regulate and for hormones to regulate, because you're missing that really important component. And of course, you're still making bile, but it's just not as efficient as it was before. But all that to say is, if you need to get your gallbladder removed and it's kind of too late, in that situation, you just have to do what your doctor says. But it's important to really support hormonal balance, because the gallbladder will be affected. I keep hearing about essential oils. What are your thoughts, beneficial or bull? I wouldn't say they're bull, you guys. I think essential oils are actually really not respected and not used responsibly. A lot of people don't realize that plants are medicine. They aren't necessarily food all the time. And we've, in our culture, we've kind of been shaped to see plants are pure and plants are food and plants are these amazing, beautiful things. And they are beautiful and they're powerful. But a lot of their compounds are super estrogenic, and the phenols in essential oils specifically love to store up in the fatty tissue. And so it's just very important to see plants as medicine. They are very powerful. They have very powerful estrogenic compounds and other plant compounds that affect the human body and mammals' bodies in a very specific way, for a very specific reason. Plants don't want to be eaten, you guys, and that's why they have developed these mechanisms over thousands of years to protect themselves from the elements, from us, from mammals, from everything. And so it's super important to keep that in mind when we're, taking essential oils willy-nilly. Of course, it's probably better to try something with essential oils before you go straight for the Advil or the Tylenol, but it's also important to treat them with respect. And I think a lot of these people that are slathering them all over their thyroid and stuff, are crazy. They're just batshit crazy, because essential oils have phenols that store up in the fatty tissue. your thyroid is a fatty tissue, you guys. And so I see a lot of people that overuse essential oils, specifically the really estrogenic ones like lavender and stuff. They have hypothyroidism straight up because they're just constantly putting those phenols in their body. Now, that's, of course, not to say that they aren't powerful. They absolutely are. They absolutely work. I just use them really strategically. If I'm going to use them from day to day, I'm going to put them in my diffuser and breathe them in and use them for aromatherapy. And if I'm going to put them on my skin, it's going to be for a very specific reason, you know, like using diluted peppermint when I have a headache. I don't just like straight up go like, I'm going to slather peppermint all over myself every single day. I stay away from the really estrogenic ones like lavender for the most part, unless I really, really need it, just because I'm not trying to slather myself with more estrogens. You know what I mean? TSH of 4, but okay, free T4 and free T3. What could be the cause? I'm eating right, taking supplements, but IDK how to support this directly. Thyroid stimulating hormone, that's a little high, and of course 4 is by conventional methods considered normal up until 5, but obviously optimal is usually between 1 and 2. So having high TSH is usually a stressor. Keep in mind, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, comes from the pituitary gland in the brain. It's how the brain communicates to the thyroid as to what's going on. But sometimes TSH can come into play if you're taking iodine, so I would look at your supplements, like what are you taking? But overall, I would look at stressors in general. Are you eating enough carbohydrates? Are you eating enough food in general? Are you over-exercising? Are you getting enough sunlight? Are you in a really stressful relationship? Are you in a really stressful environment? You would want to see what stressors are. What is your brain registering as stress to tell the thyroid to, you know, hey buddy, trying to get thyroid attention, and the thyroid's maybe not responding as well, and that's why the brain's having to pump out more thyroid stimulating hormones. So those are things you want to think about. The thyroid stimulating hormone is how the brain stimulates the thyroid. And so the brain is registering stress in some way, shape, or form, and it's really about figuring out what that stressor is. A lot of people with high TSH are also struggling with estrogen dominance, or they have low progesterone, or they're on birth control, which is shutting down their production of progesterone, and you know they're taking those xenoestrogens every single day. So there are reasons. It's just kind of digging and trying to figure out what is your brain registering as stress. And a lot of people are eating a lot of anti-thyroid compounds without realizing it. Eating tons of cruciferous vegetables. Keep in mind, they're all goitrogenic, you guys. So those are going to be really thyroid suppressive. Or eating lots of raw greens. Those can be really thyroid suppressive. Lots of nuts and seeds. All the phytic acid in there is binding to lots of your good nutrients like zinc and copper. Those are all really important for thyroid health. They're also, you know, full of polyunsaturated fats, which, you know, in abundance can be stressful for the thyroid. So those are things to also think about. You know, people are drinking lots of nut milks and things like that. Hello, phytoestrogens. So you want to kind of observe your habits. And a lot of people right now, unfortunately, because of this health and wellness community, they think like, oh, I'm being so healthy and like, I don't know what's wrong. And they're coming to me and they're like eating kale salads and like drinking almond milk. And I'm like, what the hell are you eating? You know, like what are you actually eating? Because that's not really food. So it's really important to look at your nutrition through the eyes of your biology. What is your biology thinking of your nutrition? What are your cells being told? Because food that you're eating is information, and your environment is information, and your body's going to respond accordingly. That's all hormones are, guys. Hormones are just how your cells communicate to each other. If the cells are stressed, hormones are going to be out of whack. Would hypothyroidism be the main cause of long-term appetite loss? Doc says it's stress-related, but I have other hypo symptoms for like 6 months. Blood work was normal. Just depends. Like it totally could be. It could be that the vagus nerve's kind of annoyed. Like it's annoyed. That's how I refer to things. The vagus nerve's a little bit weak. Like you're not getting that. Your vagal tone's a little weak. It could be that foods may be moving very slowly. Your transit time is kind of slow. Are you constipated? You know, constipation can really cause a lack of appetite. Lack of bile flow. Keep in mind that hypothyroidism is responsible for, or hypothyroidism can affect bile flow from the gallbladder, and that can make you really nauseous and lose your appetite if all that bile is just kind of sitting there and sluggish. So absolutely, hypothyroidism could totally cause a loss of appetite because everything's working slowly. But I would say it's probably, hypothyroidism drives stress. So yeah, your doctor is right in the sense of like it's stress, but it could definitely be hypothyroidism as well because hypothyroidism is stress. Are gallstones the same as any kind of stone caused by calcification? Do you have to avoid tons of calcium because of it? It's a little different than like kidney stones and things. Gallstones can sometimes be, a lot of times like gallstones are different. Those are hard calcified pieces, whereas there is like gallbladder blockages where the bile just gets so sluggish and so sludgy that it's having a hard time flowing. This is why I really love castor oil packs and coffee enemas. Of course, make sure you ask your doctor before doing them, but castor oil packs, castor oil applied topically actually dilates the bile ducts. So dilating means you're opening them up. It's allowing more bile to flow through. And when your bile's super sluggish from years of estrogen dominance, lots of junk coming out of your liver, you want those bile ducts as dilated as possible so things can move through. Coffee enemas also really stimulate bile flow, and they can be really beneficial for liver and gallbladder health. So they work really well together, and it just really depends. I've seen some people be diagnosed with gallstones that really had just like very sluggish bile, and they were able to, with proper strategic nutrition and proper supplementation and using like things like coffee enemas and castor oil packs, they were able to get their gallstones to either pass or just kind of dissolve. But of course, talk to your doctor about all of that. Hi Jessica, I'm using an antibiotic on a UTI. Can I use herbs after I finish? What to do after an antibiotic cure? I don't really worry about antibiotic use as much as other people do because there are emerging studies that are showing that if you go and so think about it this way, when you take antibiotics, you're wiping 1/3 of your gut out. So you still have 2/3 of everything, but you're wiping out 1/3 of your microbiome. And you're creating space. When you're wiping bacteria out, you're just creating space, right? And all of these bacteria and pathogens that live in your gut are opportunistic. They're going to, the minute that you create space, they're going to try to take up space because that means that they're now the big dogs, right? They're kind of keeping the ecosystem alive. Imagine it like cops and robbers and firemen and lawyers and, like everybody has their place and their part in the ecosystem. And so when you create space with an antibiotic, you don't want to be just like throwing random strains down your throat and like saying like I'm healing my gut, because sometimes what can happen is you've created so much space that now you're implementing new strains that your body previously would have said absolutely not, you're not taking up residence here, but now there's space, and so those things might take up residence. I've actually seen people take like huge amounts of probiotics post antibiotic and cause more microbiome issues rather than fix their microbiome. So I usually just say like leave it alone for a couple months, just let your body go back to normal, and then just kind of see how things fall. Let them fall where they may, and then you can kind of do some work after that if there needs to be work done. But I don't really stress about antibiotic use that much. For UTIs, if my UTI is not going away, antibiotics do tend to work. I usually will chug cranberry juice and take something called, it's called D-mannose with cranactin. It's by Solar Ray. It works really, really good. That one works pretty good. What are your thoughts on acupuncture and also progesterone cream? I like acupuncture. Well, I shouldn't say I like it. I think it is very relaxing and it can be beneficial when used regularly. However, I hate it. For me, I'm such a type A, go person. Laying there for 30 minutes with needles sticking out of my face is literal agony, but I do it. And then when it comes to progesterone cream, it just really depends on the person. Keep in mind that progesterone cream does absorb differently as opposed to taking it orally or doing something like that. So it's just, it's okay for a lot of people, but that is really relative to the person. You know your lab results better than I do. You know your situation better than I do. And so I can't really say for sure, is progesterone cream good for you? I don't know. But progesterone cream in general tends to be helpful for a lot of women. women, especially when they're struggling with low progesterone. The goal is to get yourself to a point where you're making enough progesterone so you don't have to supplement it. But, when you're in need, you're in need, Can your body get rid of the HPV virus with time? Any way to assist it in doing this? When it comes to viruses, it's one of those things where they usually lay pretty dormant unless the immune system is low. And this is true for Lyme's or Epstein-Barr or something like this. So I would assume it's the same for HPV. I really haven't done too much research into the HPV virus, but I would assume it's kind of similar. But that's something that you'd have to do a little bit more research on and ask your doctor about. I need to look more into it. It's something I am interested in. I know it's a really controversial subject. Thank you for your response. Since last February, I've been getting hives on upper arms, very itchy, and wondering if you have any idea of why I'm getting those. I don't know why. I could never say why, just because I don't know your situation. I don't know exactly what you're struggling with. But, estrogen can drive hives. High serotonin can drive hives. Lack of B vitamins can drive hives. So many things can drive hives. So it's really hard for me to say. Usually when when I actually see someone's whole situation, I can usually start to say okay, it's possibly this or possibly this. But a lot of times, if you have high histamine levels, you're gonna have high hives. You can have hives, rosacea, other inflammatory conditions of the skin. So, I would say it's probably high histamine, and I don't know if you have gut issues or not, if that seems something that would be maybe applicable to your situation, but excess estrogen does make the bowels kind of sluggish and can absolutely cause candida to grow and things like that. The microbiome will start to shift, and then your body has a hard time breaking down histamine properly. I've been having hair loss over the last couple months that I've noticed. I have Lyme, fibro, thyroid issues, and high testosterone levels. What is good for hair loss, and what is a great shampoo? When it comes to shampoos and topicals, it's just best to try to not strip your scalp as much as possible. I have figured out my routine, but it takes some time, and I guess it's always changing. I'll use Acure Organics once a week, and then I'll use Morocco Method once a week as a co-wash, and then once a week, I'll do an apple cider vinegar borax rinse as a co-wash. So I'm trying to shampoo my hair as least amount as possible, but I don't like the feeling of dirty hair. Those girls that are I can go 10 days without shampooing my hair. I'm just oh my God, my skin would crawl. It's gross. And I can smell people's hair, and I just get weirded out. So I try to shampoo the least amount as possible, but I've kind of figured out my routine. But when it comes to hair loss, it's usually internal. Keep in mind that your hair is not a necessary thing for survival. And so when you start to lose hair, it's very important to understand that the hair follicles themselves are kind of like mini organs. They have really high need for glucose, for sugars, for nutrients, and when your body's not getting that, the hair is kind of the first thing to go. And when it comes to hair loss, it's not one specific thing that's driving it, it's stress in general. And so the first thing that needs to occur is nourishment. We have to nourish our bodies. And when it comes to fibromyalgia and Lyme's and thyroid issues, all of those are just signs that the body's under intense stress. When it comes to fibro, a lot of times it's being driven by copper toxicity and estrogen dominance and progesterone deficiency, and then Lyme's, the immune system is down, which most likely I think you have thyroid issues. So yeah, low thyroid is going to cause low immunity and allow viruses to kind of take up residence. So high testosterone is usually a sign that a woman's struggling with estrogen issues, because keep in mind, in a woman's body that doesn't have high testosterone, her testosterone tends to convert and aromatize to estrogen in a lot of cases. But I find that women with high testosterone tend to have elevated estrogen and elevated testosterone because their body's no longer turning testosterone into estrogen. So there's a lot of caveats to what's going on. I would say that there's a few stressors on the body, I would assume. So that could be why hair loss is occurring. And it's not going to be one specific thing that stops the hair loss. It's going to be getting to the root of the issue and getting your body out from under that stress. And the first thing we have to do, guys, when we're struggling with stress is simply eat and eat enough. Eat the right things. Stop eating foods that are causing our body to have to process or having a hard time extract nutrients from. Give our bodies easy to digest, nutrient-dense foods regularly with frequency, not sporadically, making sure we're getting enough sleep and enough sunlight and mindful movement. And we're, de-stressing our environment as much as possible. That's the goal. That's the first thing every single body, regardless of the health struggle, needs. And then once we do that, then we can start to dig a little deeper. I've had hypothalamic amenorrhea for several years, and I'm now experiencing a lot of cervical mucus. Does this mean something is coming, or could it mean nothing? Egg white cervical mucus is one of those things where it can tell you something is coming, but it's not like a sign of ovulation occurring. We do need to be tracking our temperatures. We do need to be tracking our cervical position to see if that's changing. But yeah, usually early signs, like I've seen women that struggle with hypothalamic amenorrhea, what happens is they begin to see like slight cramping around when an ovulation would occur. And it doesn't happen, they go through a few cycles where they're not ovulating, they're not getting a period, but they are seeing slight cramping occur. And so there are signs that the body is moving. You don't want to think of it as like I have my period or I don't have my period. There are tons of hormonal shifts that occur when you lose a period, and it takes time for those hormonal shifts to occur to the point where we're not getting a cycle anymore. And so it's going to take time for those hormonal shifts to kind of go back to how they were before. And that's just can sometimes take months and months and months. So I wouldn't say like, yes, an ovulation is occurring, but something could absolutely be occurring. And it's a good sign to see egg white cervical mucus, especially if you haven't seen it before or in a long time. Hi, Jessica. During the exercise, my hands are so puffy. Why it can be? I'm assuming it's just, when you're exercising, your hands are puffy. And at that point, I would not exercise the way that I am. So are you exercising really hard? Are you exercising, too much? Are you making sure you're replenishing with sodium? Or do you have a high stress response while you're exercising? I always recommend that women drink some type of something that has sugar and a little bit of protein maybe. For example, I will do half juice and half water in this. I'll fill this 42 ounce with half juice, like grape juice or apple juice or something, half water, and then I'll add a couple pinches of sea salt, just so that I'm getting some, and a scoop of either BCAAs or collagen for some protein. And the reason I do that is because I'm getting a little bit of protein, a little sugar, and my body's not having to switch into that stress response to make its own sugar. Because when we're under more stress, when we're exercising, whether it's good stress or bad stress, our body needs more fuel, not less. And so a lot of people picture in their mind though, when I'm exercising, my body's tapping right into my fat stores and my fat's just melting off. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Your body begins to eat muscles and tissues first, and when it starts to feel really stressed, then it starts to open up those fat cells under duress. That's not how we want our body to do things. So it's really important to give our body some type of fuel while we're working out. And if that doesn't work, sometimes women don't do well with exercise for a little while until they get their body more balanced. Do you have a way for us to get HTMA and Dutch test through your website? And what magnesium spray do you recommend and how to use it? I do provide HTMA testing and Dutch testing to my clients. I don't just allow people to just order Dutch test or HTMA for themselves, because it's kind of useless. I'll be honest. If you don't have someone to interpret it for you, it makes no sense to order one. But yeah, I do provide it to my clients who work up with me one-on-one. And then with magnesium spray, I personally use Life Flow, but most magnesium sprays are pretty good. You can also make your own by getting magnesium flakes and just dissolving them in warm water, and that will be a magnesium spray. How do you think one can get nutrients after a gastric sleeve? I'm asking for a friend. I think it's just one of those things where you kind of have to be very cautious, go low and slow, and kind of work alongside your doctor. I would probably look into making sure that I'm producing enough hydrochloric acid, I'm producing enough digestive enzymes, those types of things. And that would kind of be what I would look for, is because if you have a gastric sleeve, if you didn't get the whole stomach bypassed, then there still is some function. It's just figuring out how much function and utilizing that function to to your advantage. As much function as you have, you want to make sure you're utilizing it. So stomach acid and digestive enzymes are the things that I would look into and run by my doctor. How do we know if we're making enough vitamin K? I would say like most people don't, especially if they have gut issues. But yeah, if you're eating like some greens here and there, you're doing lots of vitamin K rich foods like raw milk or high quality milk, ghee, grass-fed butter, liver, those types of foods, cheese, those are really good and high in vitamin K. We also will produce vitamin K from like eating leafy greens, but it just really depends on how well we're digesting them and what type of gut bacteria we have. A lot of people these days have a really imbalanced gut bacteria, and so sometimes they're not producing enough vitamin K. I would say most people benefit from supplementing it. I personally supplement it with myself, and it really does help with people who have high testosterone tend to have low vitamin K as well. A question just came in. Do you think everyone should supplement K2? What are your opinion the most common deficiencies? Magnesium is definitely a common deficiency. Potassium's pretty common. Sodium's actually pretty common, and so I just like recommend make sure you're salting your foods. And vitamin K is pretty commonly low, as well as vitamin E. Not to keep going, but yeah, vitamin E, vitamin K, magnesium, potassium, and then sodium. Vitamin D tends to be low in a lot of people, but a lot of people don't realize that like vitamin D is low for a reason. A lot of times the body will lower vitamin D to prevent the calcification of tissues. When we have high calcium and we have low vitamin K, vitamin D is really dangerous and starts to calcify things. And so the body usually lowers vitamin D for a reason. And if we see low vitamin D, we should always think, did my body lower this for a reason? So I would say, yeah, a lot of people have low vitamin D, but I wouldn't call it a deficiency. And then a lot of people need B vitamins, which I tend to recommend people getting them from brewer's yeast, and they can also do like a B complex. How to know how many B-vites? Which brewer's yeast would you use? You're just looking for a brewer's yeast that is non-GMO and not grown on wheat. So I use Blue Bonnet. It's grown on non-GMO sugar beets, and it's really, really good. But, I mean, it doesn't taste good, but it's really, really high quality. So you're really just looking for non-GMO and gluten-free or wheat-free. But it doesn't really matter. And then, of course, you're looking for something that's not fortified. Yeast naturally is high in B vitamins. You don't want fortification or fortified B vitamins. But yeah, it has a lot of B vitamins, and it actually encourages your body to make more B vitamins. This is also true of sourdough bread. So keep in mind, the longer your sourdough ferments, that yeast is actually eating the sugars and producing B vitamins as their byproduct. So that's why, long fermented sourdough is actually quite beneficial for our hormones. What are your thoughts on metformin? Metformin increases lactic acid in the cell, so how it does, it's kind of like poisoning the cell in a sense so that it wastes glucose. And it can mess with like the mitochondria and ATP production. However, some people do really well on it. I personally saw horrible effects, like I got super depressed and had hair loss that like really took like years to stop. But that was just me personally, and I took it like over 3 years ago. But I think it's kind of very person specific. I think most of its benefit comes from the fact that it shifts the gut microbiome, and for some people, increasing that Akkermansia bacteria can actually really increase metabolic health. But we can increase Akkermansia in different ways. Taking a spore-based probiotic, a targeted prebiotic like Just Thrive or Megaspore can sometimes increase Akkermansia. Just, increasing our gut microbiome, the health of our gut can increase Akkermansia. So there's other things that can sometimes have the same metabolic benefit as metformin, but some people do see a lot of benefit on it. So I think it's just really a personal thing, a personal decision. I'm kind of more neutral on it. Was so happy to get period in August after 20 months no period. Woohoo, Gina. Got back after quitting keto and upping carbs. Yeah, magical. Haven't had another period since though. Is this normal when trying to balance hormones? It can be. It's one of those things, hit or miss. Some people will get their period back and it's like back, and it's just they cycle after cycle. But sometimes it will like come back and then it'll, miss 8 weeks. But I always say getting a period is better than not getting one at all. So I would just kind of like hang in there, cross the fingers. I know it's November, so August, September, October, November, like, yeah, it has been 3 months. So I just kind of keep an eye on things. If things don't change or shift, then maybe something, does need a little shift or a little change. But overall, I mean, you've done a lot of hard work and you continue to do so. So I wouldn't, there might not be much more you can do except for kind of wait it out. But I'm not sure. I'm just speculating. What makes someone bloated when they eat enough? I'm not trying to be restrictive. Well, a lot of times people were restrictive for a long time, so we kind of have to look at our past, or we were restricted for a really long time, and then all of a sudden we're like trying to eat more, eat enough, and we're super bloated. Yeah, of course, your body's like, what the heck? Like, all this bacteria got overgrown, we had, like, our bile wasn't flowing properly, our thyroid was messed up, things were moving sluggishly through the digestive tract, and so yeast was growing and bacteria was growing. Like, when we go and eat more, a lot of times we'll see negative experience, like bloating or something, and we think automatically bad, right? Like, oh my gosh, I've gained so much weight, I'm so bloated, like eating this much must be bad. And it's like, well, sometimes we have to see things get a little worse before they get better, especially if we've tried to manipulate our body or unconsciously manipulated our body for such a long time. Now our body just needs like a space to heal. I kind of think of it as like when you get home from a long day and you like unbutton your pants and you're just like, and you let it like all hang out. Like, it's similar. Like, the body's finally like, like, just like, let me rebalance and like recalibrate for a second. Or like taking your bra off at the end of the night. Like, those things are flapping everywhere, but you finally feel pretty like, okay, things are starting to balance out. So it's similar. Like, I think it's important to understand that when the body has been forced to compensate for so long, because that's what happens. Our habits and our environment cause our body to compensate out of protection for us. When we start to implement the right habits, we expect instant results. Like, oh, I'm doing the right things, and like, I should just see all these results. And it's like the body's like, dude, I've been, manipulated and abused for years. Like, I'm just trying to survive. And so you got to give it time for hormones to kind of shift and for the body to get the picture that, oh, I'm not in a famine any longer. Like, there's not going to be a point in time where I'm not going to get food for 8 hours, So it's one of those things where it's hard for me to say like what makes someone bloated. A lot of times when we haven't eaten enough for a long time, our thyroid's a little low, our bowels are a little sluggish, we have bacterial overgrowth, that kind of thing, and it just kind of takes some time. But sometimes it can be that we're not, things that we're eating are still kind of not working for us. We're eating lots of raw vegetables and that's not working for us. Like, sometimes it can be our habits for sure, but sometimes it's just that the body needs some space. I'm losing a lot of hair, and I feel like it really started 2 years ago when I took the second day pill. That was the only time I ever took a hormonal pill. Where should I even start? Yeah, you're not alone. I highly recommend, I do have a highlight story labeled Plan B, and it's about the hormone that's in that pill. Levonorgestrel, which is the synthetic estrogen, or it's really a synthetic progestin, it's a synthetic estrogen, I believe. Sorry, don't quote me on that. It might be a synthetic progestin. But either way, the progestins act very estrogenic in the body. So sometimes that can mess with the thyroid. And so that's where I would actually look is, did the thyroid get messed up, or are your progesterone levels chronically low after that? I've seen a lot of women take the morning after pill and have really hard time like getting progesterone levels back up for a while, because that high amount of hormones can flush a lot of nutrients out of our body, specifically vitamin C, vitamin E, B vitamins, zinc, copper, I'm trying to think of what else, selenium, all important nutrients actually needed to create a healthy corpus luteum, which is that gland that makes this progesterone. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's almost like taking a handful of birth control pills. And so we know that, okay, birth control depletes us of specific nutrients needed to ovulate and make progesterone, which is how it keeps us from getting pregnant. It stops our cycle, but how it stops our cycle is it stops us from ovulating and making that corpus luteum, which makes that progesterone. And the way that it does that is by depleting us of the nutrients needed to do so. So, it's important to kind of keep that in mind. And of course, it works with other mechanisms as well, but I find that I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it flushes us of nutrients. So that's where I would look first, but I would also look to the thyroid. How are your temperatures? How are your pulses? Those are things that you can kind of use to like self-test in a sense. Like if you have, chronically low temperatures under 97.8 when you're waking, and then, you're not rising to 98.6 throughout the day, there could be like some hypothyroidism going on. And at that point you could kind of say like, oh, hey doc, can we test my thyroid and get a full thyroid panel? But that's where I would look for sure. Hey Jess, what's an optimal T3 and T4 range? Also, can you share the metric? As I'm in Canada, we use a different measurement system. Thank you. Also, how can we improve T4 and T3 when on birth control pill? It's really hard to improve thyroid markers when we're on the birth control pill because we're not making progesterone. And so progesterone is what stimulates the thyroid in the second half of the cycle to actually get our body temperature up. Because keep in mind that second half of the cycle is the luteal phase. It's almost like could be considered a pre-pregnancy phase. The body's preparing things. The body's speeding up the metabolism. You're hungrier. You're getting more nutrients. Your body's really preparing for a potential implantation. And so when we're on the pill, we're not experiencing these hormonal up and downs. It's just like, and so we're not getting that like thyroid stimulating benefit of progesterone. So it can be hard. And then in addition, I don't really use T3 and T4. I look at free T3, reverse T3, and TSH more than I do T3 and T4. So off the top of my head, I honestly couldn't tell you. What's your opinion on, I'm assuming you're going to say kratom or crantom. When it comes to like these substances that don't have a lot of, I'm not like someone that's like, show me the research. Like I understand that there are things that, science can't explain, but at the same time, I'm always worried that most recreational drugs, for the sake of saying the WEED word, like I won't say it because I don't know if Instagram will censor me, but I'm looking for like a stress response. So a lot of times when people smoke marijuana or they, not CBD as much, but like the THC containing plant, they're inducing a stress response. And keep in mind, cortisol is a steroid, which is why it helps with pain. And so a lot of people don't realize that when we're stimulating a stress response, it makes us feel really good. We're feeling great because we're like making our own glucose. We're creating a steroid that's anti-inflammatory and anti-pain. We're stimulating our nervous system. And so that feels good. And so whenever it comes to substances where people are like, it feels good, so it must be good, I'm always like, well, there are hormones that can trick us and make us feel good, but aren't so good. So it's just important to kind of, I don't really know the physiological response that's happening when somebody takes that, so I couldn't say for sure. I'd have to look definitely a little bit more into it. Best way to support someone who is not illuminating on a regular basis and has a very toxic lifestyle from smoking, environmental toxins through work, and who is eating not much diet. I'm assuming you meant eliminating, or are you meaning like illuminating like sunlight? I like that term, I really do. But I'm thinking like eliminating would probably be the thing. If it's that person's not pooping on a daily basis, that's a problem, and I think that. Smoking, environmental toxins through work, who's not eating much. Okay, so if it was someone that was like not open to changing nutrition, not open to changing diet, that wouldn't, like, if I said, like, hey, can I, like, make you some lunch, or, like, can I, like, help you out, and they weren't open to that, I would probably think about magnesium to keep the bowels moving, and to also support stress, because a lot of times that's a stressful situation. It's going to deplete the body of magnesium first. I would also maybe think about doing something like Pectosol C or some type of binder like activated charcoal, just something that binds to toxins. But in reality, this is like a hard situation because we know that the body can only take so much for so long, and there's not, supplements aren't magical. So implementing supplements in a case like that might help a little bit, but overall, unless the person's willing to change, it's not something that you can do a lot about. And that's unfortunate, right? Like, that's really unfortunate. But it's something that people have to want to do. Would you recommend a potassium supplement or try to get it all through food? Would I recommend it? Yeah. It just depends on how low someone's potassium is. Beet juice is super rich in potassium. Coconut water is super rich in potassium. And then I have like a potassium broth recipe that I utilize with clients that has about like 1,500 milligrams per cup. But supplementing it a little bit can be helpful as just like a support. Because if you're in a depleted state, you're not just trying to get your daily necessary amount, but you're also trying to like get your levels back up. And so you usually need a little more than you would normally need. So yeah, a supplement can absolutely come in handy. I usually use Douglas Labs, I think the brand is, like potassium chelate or something like that. I'd have to look in my files. Eliminating not eating a lot, poor quality diet. Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, like I said, it's really hard because whether that's a family member or a husband or something like that, I know it can be really tough. And it's like we want to fix someone's whole situation. And of course we can implement some things, but people really have to be willing to change. And if they're not, like, you can't take that on, you know? It's very difficult to take on. Hi, Amber. What's the difference between AST and ALT? My AST just came back as 19 and ALT 32. They're both markers of liver health, but yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure the difference, honestly. Like, I believe they both represent a different part of liver function. I just haven't looked that deep into it, honestly. Usually when someone has abnormal levels, I just, focus heavily on the liver. Any tips for dealing with weight gain? I know it's part of my healing process, but it's not easy, and slowing down on exercising has me feel like I'm really lazy and chubby. Well, that's kind of like a mental mindset. We have to really change the way we view fat. And I know it's really hard in our culture because we just automatically see fat as bad. But it's really important to know who you're comparing yourself with. If you're following a lot of Instagram accounts that make you feel like shit, that's probably a good place to start. But usually when it comes to gaining weight, we have to see the fact that when the body starts to store fat, it is holding on for dear life. It did not feel safe for a period of time. And now that it feels that it's not in a famine for a long time, it's gonna sometimes store. Sometimes women have to gain 15 to 20 pounds in order to get their body to stop and then go back in the direction that they came from. So it just kind of depends. I call it the healing pounds. And it's just a safety issue. The body really hasn't felt safe for a very long time. And so now that it has what it needs, it's not going to waste any time. So it just takes consistency and time. And I went through a period in the first 5 months of this year. I was at my really leanest, last year. And it can definitely be mentally, I was really good shape. I was eating really well. I was sleeping really well. I was just taking care of myself really well mentally. And I felt really good. I was really lean, really muscular. And then the beginning of this year hit. Business became my ultimate priority. Fully Nourished came out. Dude, I've gained I want to say 20 pounds this year. And I just it's okay. We got roles going on, and it happens. It's one of those things where I just acknowledge that my body needed the safety, and I'm finally starting to let it, it's finally leaving, but it took some time. And I just kept eating normally, kept balancing my blood sugar, kept checking those temps and pulses, kept making sure that my body had what it needed. I manipulated a few things sometimes, I started doing mostly fruit for breakfast or right when I woke up. I was following a lot of tips from Amplified Vitality. I really like that YouTube channel. He's pretty good. But yeah, I've been working on balancing my minerals that got a little imbalanced while I was super stressed out. So there's some things that my body just was saying hey, I need some TLC. And I just let it be. I'm not obsessed with the weight because I know the weight's just a sign of something else. And that's definitely a mental struggle. Sometimes there are days where it's man, I wish I wasn't in my fat jeans, but it is what it is. What am I gonna do? Cut my calories and punish myself for it? No. Fasting insulin 135. What's the best thing to do for insulin resistance? My naturopath recommended around 100 grams of carbs. Check out the guy that I just mentioned, Amplified Vitality. That's pretty high fasting insulin. What's your post-glucose tolerance test? Are you eating a lot of grains? I have questions, So I would definitely, look at my grain consumption, my carb consumption, and in comparison to my protein consumption. I would try to not eat so many carbs at every meal. Like I would be more cautious of, okay, where are my carbs coming from and how many carbs am I getting at a meal? Rather than saying like, I'm gonna have 50 grams of carbs for breakfast today and then like have like 5 at the rest of my meals. But yeah, like 100 grams of carbs, 150 grams of carbs, like where are you at? But remember, guys, carbs don't cause insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is caused by cells that are no longer willing to take up energy in the form of glucose, which is a problem. And a lot of times I see this like post-keto, post-low carb. So is that something you've done in the past like 12, 24 months? That's something to ask yourself. You know, keto and low carb make us really insulin resistant for a while post. So yeah, there are definitely questions. You have gut issues, inflammation, thyroid issues. Like those are all things that can cause the cells to kind of not respond to insulin as well. My husband wants to know your opinion on B17. Okay, I see your question. What's the difference between anti-TPO and TG? Both are slightly elevated but have improved over time. And then I see like throwing down the questions, girl. So Instagram's cutting me off. I'm going to end it and I'll go live for like another 30 minutes and finish answering your questions. So for those of you that are still here, just go live with me again. And if I didn't get to your question, ask it.